Welcome to the Fiscal Management 3.0 training, Travel Procedures for Tier 3 Registered Student Organizations. This presentation is intended for registered student organizations, or RSOs, with members who plan to travel and expect to be reimbursed for some or all of their travel expenses. Please note that all travel expenses are paid by the traveler and reimbursed after the trip. To begin, let's go over some of the basics. As a state institution, George Mason University is bound by the Commonwealth of Virginia's rules and restrictions concerning business travel. For example, the state requires that travel be conducted in the most economical manner possible. For this reason, travel reimbursement requests submitted by George Mason employees and students are closely reviewed for accuracy and appropriateness. If you do not follow proper procedures, it may be impossible to reimburse you for your travel expenses. Reimbursements for travel expenses, such as transportation, lodging, and meals, are processed using forms created in George Mason's Travel Request System, or TRS, which can be found at travel.gmu.edu. Travelers seeking reimbursement for only their conference registration fees are not required to use the Travel Request System. Instead, they may fill out the RSO payment request form, which can be found on the Student Involvement Fiscal Management webpage. Finally, please note that the travel reimbursement process is the same for both SFB and SGR funding. Before you make any travel arrangement for which you expect to be reimbursed, it is important that you ensure that you have either SFB or SGR funding to cover your expenses. If you plan to request SFB funding, please make sure to apply well in advance. At least 7 days before your trip, you will need to submit the request and authorization to travel and the risk assessment and release form to student involvement. If you do not submit these forms before you leave, you will not be reimbursed for your travel expenses. Once you have created your profile in the travel request system, you can begin to fill out the request and authorization to travel. To do so, log back into travel.gmu.edu and select Enter Travel and then Initiate Authorization. Click Continue and then select Trip Type. From here, you will enter in your trip information. Under the section labeled Fund Org Information, please select MTHORES2 Margot Thorson from the Approver drop-down menu. After you have entered in all of your trip information, select Submit for Approval to begin the workflow approval process. Please note that students who expect to receive funding from more than one source, for example, part from the RSO and part from the College of Science, should complete and submit only one requested authorization to travel and only one travel expenses reimbursement voucher, listing all of the accounts from which the reimbursement will be paid. These forms will need to be approved by each organization and/or office that funds your travel. Therefore, it is essential that you coordinate this process ahead of time. After you select Submit for Approval, your supervisor, or in this case your organization's faculty advisor, will receive an email from travel.gmu.edu stating that a travel document has been submitted and needs his or her approval. Your supervisor will click on the workflow link in the body of the email, which will open the banner workflow application and prompt the user to enter his or her username or NetID and password. Your supervisor will then select your travel document and review its travel information and related expenses before selecting one of the two options located in the action box, either approve or return to submitter with comments. If approved, he or she will select Complete to move the travel authorization to the Student Involvement Business Manager for Fund Org approval. Once completed or returned, the traveler receives an email notification of the travel document status. At this time, the travel request system cannot accept uploaded documents. Therefore, you will need to fill out and submit either in person or via email to sibudget@gmu.edu the risk assessment and release form. This form can be found on the Student Involvement Fiscal Management webpage, located at the web address listed on this slide. Just a reminder, your request and authorization to travel must be approved before your trip. Also, Without prior approval, you may not be able to be reimbursed after the trip. When calculating your expected travel costs, please note that the Commonwealth of Virginia has set limits on the amount travelers can be reimbursed for travel to and daily expenses at any given location. These limits are embedded in the Travel Request system. When completing forms in the Travel Request system, therefore, some areas of the forms will automatically populate with these limits. For example, if you travel to Minneapolis, the current maximum amount you will be reimbursed for lodging is $140 per day, excluding taxes and surcharges. For the Bronx and New York City, the rate varies from $181 to $306 per day, depending on the time of year. So, if you choose to stay in the most expensive hotel at your destination, you will not be reimbursed for the full cost if it exceeds the limit set by the state. When traveling, it is essential that you keep all of your original receipts, including hotel bills and receipts for tolls, parking fees, taxis, airline baggage fees, etc. The only exception is for meals and incidental expenses, or M&IE, which are reimbursed on a per diem basis. The M&IE per diem rates cover expenses such as meals, including taxes and tips, transportation to where meals are taken, personal telephone calls, laundry expenses, and tips to baggage handlers. For example, in Minneapolis, the M&IE per diem rate is $64 per day. Regardless of how much you actually spend, you will be reimbursed $64 per day as long as your stay qualifies for reimbursement for all 3 meals in Minneapolis. Please note that on travel departure and return days, travelers automatically receive 75% of the per diem meal allowance, plus the $5 incidental allowance, regardless of the time of departure or return. The return day allowance is based on the rate at the location where the traveler spent the night prior to returning home. In regards to driving to and/or from your travel location, students may use their personal cars or rent vehicles through Enterprise. The guidelines for choosing which option is more appropriate are as follows. If the travel is under 100 miles per day, a personal vehicle should be used. For example, for a 3-day trip, 300 total miles would be the maximum. If the travel is over 100 miles per day, an Enterprise rental car should be used. Please note that if you choose to drive your own car when your trip is over 100 miles per day, your reimbursement may be affected. To rent a car from Enterprise, students must be 21 years or older. There is a link to the Enterprise site on the Student Involvement Fiscal Management webpage and also on the George Mason Fiscal Services website. Unfortunately, RSOs may not use Mason Motor Pool vehicles to travel. Because the travel rules and procedures around deciding whether to drive a personal vehicle or rent a car can be complicated, we recommend that students contact the travel office either via email at travel@gmu.edu or by phone at 703-993-2580 directly. Working with the travel office will help ensure that everything is done correctly and that you are reimbursed for this expense. Within 3 weeks of your return date, you will need to use the Travel Request system to create a Travel Expenses Reimbursement voucher. To do so, please log in to https://travel.gmu.edu, select Enter Travel, select View, Edit, Trip, select Initiate Reimbursement. To edit this section based on actual travel costs, select the blue Edit Info links. Enter new and/or revised information and select Continue. After your edits are completed, scroll down and select Submit for approval. Print a copy of the Travel Expenses Reimbursement voucher and select Continue and then select Yes. Attach your original receipts to the copy of the Travel Expenses Reimbursement voucher that you printed and submit the paperwork to Student Involvement. Just another reminder, travelers who need to be reimbursed only for their conference registration fees, no travel expenses, do not have to use the Travel Request system. Instead, submit an RSO payment request form along with proof of your registration, usually an email confirmation, and proof of payment, for example, your credit card or bank statement, or the front back side of the cash check to Student Involvement. In regards to funding, the maximum amount of funding the Student Funding Board will award is $1,000 per organization per academic year. The $1,000 available for travel is included in the maximum amount of $5,000 funding that Tier 3 RSOs can receive. The maximum reimbursement that can be paid using SFB funding is $250 per person per year. Funding that is awarded for travel between June 1st and August 30th counts toward the next academic year's funding allotment. As for SGR funding, there is no limit on the amount of reimbursement that can be paid per person using this money. Students may also receive reimbursements that combine SFB funding and SGR as long as their travel expenses exceed $250. Be sure to let the business manager know if you expect a reimbursement to include a combination of SGR and SFB funding. This concludes the Fiscal Management 3.0 training, Travel Procedures for Tier 3 Registered Student Organizations. In order to receive credit for FM 3.0 training, you must complete the RSO 3.0 test on Blackboard. When you have completed the test, Student Funding Board will record your score. It is your responsibility to complete the test before the September 23rd, 2016 deadline at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time.